Picture this. It's 1914. Picture this. It's 1914. The average factory worker is making about $2.30 for a 9-hour day. It's tough, grueling work with high turnover. Then, one man, Henry Ford, decides to do something absolutely radical, something that other industrialists called reckless and borderline socialist. He announced he would pay his workers $5 a day, more than double the average wage, and cut the workday to 8 hours. Now you might think, how could doubling wages possibly make someone richer? It sounds like a recipe for bankruptcy. But this move wasn't just an act of generosity. It was one of the most brilliant business strategies in history. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how paying his workers more money turned Henry Ford into one of the wealthiest men in the world. Stick around, because the story is packed with lessons that are still incredibly relevant today. Before we dive into the $5 day, we need to understand the world Ford was operating in. The early 20th century was the height of the Industrial Revolution. Factories were popping up everywhere, but the work was mind-numbingly repetitive, especially on Ford's revolutionary assembly line. He had perfected the process of mass production for his Model T, but he had a massive problem. People. The work was so monotonous and physically demanding that worker turnover was through the roof. In 1913, Ford had to hire over 50,000 people just to maintain a workforce of about 14,000. That's a turnover rate of 370%. Imagine the costs. Constantly training new people, the slowdowns from inexperienced workers, the administrative nightmare of it all. It was a huge drain on efficiency and profits. Ford famously said, "The man who will use his hands and his head must be paid, and the man who will not use his head must go." The problem was, most of them were going. This high turnover was his biggest bottleneck. He had this incredible machine for making cars, the assembly line, but the human parts of that machine were constantly breaking down and needing replacement. He needed a stable, reliable, and motivated workforce to keep the lines moving at maximum speed. So he and his vice president, James Couzens, cooked up a plan. It wasn't just a wage increase. It was a complete overhaul of how they valued their workers. On January 5, 1914, Ford Motor Company made the historic announcement. The $5 day was born, but there was a catch. It wasn't just a straight $5 for everyone. First, you had to be with the company for at least 6 months. And second, this wasn't just a wage. It was a profit-sharing plan. The base pay was still closer to the old rate, but the rest came as a bonus. And to qualify for that bonus, you had to live a certain way. This is where it gets really interesting and a bit controversial. Ford established what he called the sociological department. This department employed investigators, or advisors, who would visit employees' homes. Their job was to ensure workers were living a proper life. They checked if the home was clean, if the workers were saving money, if they were sober, and if their family life was stable. Essentially, Ford was paying them not just to build cars, but to be upstanding citizens according to his own standards. If you didn't meet these standards, you didn't get the full $5. You were given time to improve, and the advisors would help you. But if you failed to change your ways, you were out. Now, by today's standards, this sounds incredibly intrusive, and it was. But at the time, for thousands of workers, it was a golden opportunity. It was a ticket to the middle class. So what happened when the announcement went public? Absolute chaos. The very next day, an estimated 10,000 men swarmed the Ford factory in Highland Park, Michigan, hoping to get a job. The crowd was so massive that the police had to be called in to control it. Ford had instantly created a massive supply of labor. He could now pick the very best, most reliable, and most dedicated workers from a huge pool of applicants. And what about the workers already inside the factory? The effect was immediate and dramatic. That crippling turnover rate plummeted. It dropped from 370% down to just 16% within a year. Absenteeism also fell sharply. Why? Because these jobs were now the best in the country. No one wanted to lose a $5 a day job. With a stable and experienced workforce, productivity soared. The assembly lines ran smoother and faster than ever before. The cost of training new employees vanished. Fewer errors were made. The entire production process became hyper-efficient. Ford was getting more cars built, better cars built, and he was doing it with a happier, more loyal workforce. The increase in productivity more than paid for the increased wages. Between 1914 and 1916, the company's profits doubled from $30 million to $60 million. Ford's gamble was paying off, big time. But the genius of the $5 day goes even deeper. Think about it. What do you do when you suddenly have more money? You buy things. And what was the ultimate consumer product of the era? The automobile. Specifically, the Ford Model T. Before the $5 day, a Model T was a luxury that most of Ford's own workers could never afford. But with the new wage, a Ford employee could save up and buy their own car in less than 4 months. Henry Ford wasn't just creating workers. He was creating customers. He understood a fundamental economic principle that many of his peers missed. A mass production economy needs mass consumption to sustain it. If you want to sell millions of cars, you need millions of people who can afford to buy them. This created a powerful positive feedback loop. Higher wages led to more car sales. More car sales meant more production was needed. More production meant more jobs. And all of this cemented the Ford Motor Company's dominance in the market. He was building his own market from the inside out. He turned his employees into brand ambassadors and walking advertisements for the affordable, middle-class lifestyle that the Model T represented. This strategy also had a huge public relations benefit. Henry Ford became a folk hero. He was seen as a progressive, benevolent captain of industry who cared about the common man. This image was priceless. It attracted not only the best workers, but also loyal customers who wanted to support a company they believed in. The news of the $5 day spread across the globe, making Ford and the Model T household names. It was marketing genius disguised as social welfare. Of course, not everyone was happy. Other business owners were furious. They accused Ford of disrupting the labor market and setting an impossible standard. The Wall Street Journal called the plan an economic crime. They feared that workers everywhere would start demanding similar wages, which would eat into their profits. And they were right to be worried. Ford had fundamentally changed the relationship between labor and capital in America. So let's recap the brilliant layers of this strategy. First, it solved his biggest production problem: employee turnover. This massively increased efficiency and productivity. Second, it gave him the pick of the best, most motivated workers in the country. Third, it turned his own workforce into a new market for his product, creating a cycle of growth. And fourth, it generated an incredible amount of positive publicity, building a powerful brand image that attracted both talent and customers. The $5 day was more than just a pay raise. It was a comprehensive business system. It was an investment in human capital that paid off exponentially. Ford understood that a well-paid, stable worker is a productive worker. And a productive worker who can afford the products he builds is the engine of a modern consumer economy. This move essentially created the American middle class. It set a new benchmark for wages and living standards. It proved that paying workers a living wage wasn't just good for society, it was good for business. It demonstrated that the success of a company is directly tied to the prosperity of its employees. Henry Ford was a complex and often contradictory figure. His sociological department's methods were paternalistic and controlling, and he was notoriously anti-union. But the logic behind the $5 day remains a powerful lesson in business. It teaches us that employees are not just an expense on a spreadsheet. They are an asset to be invested in. They are the engine of production and the foundation of your customer base. By seeing the bigger picture, by understanding the interconnectedness of production, consumption, and human motivation, Henry Ford didn't just build a car company. He built an economic empire and in the process, helped build modern America. His decision to double wages wasn't a reckless gamble. It was a calculated masterstroke that made him, and his company, richer than ever. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history of business and innovation. Let me know in the comments what you think about Ford's strategy. See you in the next video.